Hi, I'm Joe Saunders with Miniature Landscape Hobbies. In this episode, we're going to talk about a very important, but sometimes misunderstood ingredient in building in miniature, and that is varnishes. Varnishes seem to be one of those things that divide the model building community. Do you use it? Don't you use it? Do you apply it with a brush? Do you apply it with an airbrush? And honestly, varnishes range in quality and style from things that are very, very useful to things that have occasional use, and to some products that are just downright useless. Now, that doesn't mean that varnishes should be ignored. In fact, they have a lot of really important applications. I came to using varnishes fairly late in my model building career. I went for years just simply not seeing the point. Now, when I really started making miniature landscape hobbies, though, one of my major objectives was to look at other disciplines of building in miniature and to borrow techniques from them. What I learned was that varnish was actually a really important ingredient in a lot of builds. So in this video, I'd like to look at the different types of varnishes and see how to use them and how to apply them. There are three kinds of varnish: gloss, matte, and satin. All of them have brush applications and can also be applied by airbrush. Of these versions, the ones that are polyurethane or acrylic are the types that are appropriate to model building, at least in my opinion. There are other types, such as lacquer-based ones, but I find they don't really have a use with my type of model building. And see those warning and hazard labels on there? They might be just a little too scary for me. Matte varnish is probably the most common option people use, and it primarily has two uses. The first is pretty obvious, and that is protecting your work. At the end of every project, I suggest that pretty well any model or terrain builder give their work 2 to 3 coats. This will help it survive some wear and tear. Matte varnishes can also help fix down scenic effects like static grass. It's no substitute for glue, of course, but a quick spritz of matte varnish is extra insurance to ensure everything stays where it's supposed to. Now, I hear some of my viewers saying, yeah, but matte varnish generally isn't considered all that strong a varnish. And it really isn't. Most people consider gloss a better varnish to help your models resist wear and tear. But of course, you really can't put gloss on that many surfaces without whatever you're working on looking kind of weird. Now, one thing I have heard is putting down a layer of gloss varnish on your models and then follow up with a layer of matte varnish to fix a shine. I haven't tried it myself, but it might be worth looking into, especially if you have models that are handled a lot, such as when you're wargaming at a store or doing demonstrations. The next varnish is satin varnish. This type sits in the middle. It's not really shiny, but it's not matte either. In model building, it's sometimes used like matte varnish to protect your finished work. Sometimes I prefer how it looks on models that are supposed to be more modern looking or technological, or are fresh from the factory without any wear or tear. Despite this though, satin varnish's primary use is preparing models for enamel washes. The glossier surface of the satin varnish aids the wash by enhancing its capillary action, so it flows better into nooks and crannies on the model. Also, the thinners and enamels can be harsh on layers of acrylics, and sometimes you have to be pretty careful with that. So if you use a layer of satin varnish first, it can provide a good seal to make sure you don't destroy your own work. Lastly, I've found a real advantage of satin varnish in that it resists acrylic paint slightly. If you want to add a real sharp highlight with a dry brush, a quick layer of satin varnish first will help ensure that your paint only sticks to edges of flat surfaces. The last varnish to talk about is gloss varnish. As I mentioned before, it has great qualities for protecting your models, but it is really used more commonly for three distinct effects. The first is to add decals or water slide transfers. When you apply a transfer, the backing on it is glossy, so it can leave a distinct shiny border around it. This is often referred to as silvering. I went years simply avoiding transfers because of this. Later, while doing some research, I learned that if you put a layer of gloss varnish down first, the silvering would be hidden. So now I put a thin coat of gloss varnish down by brush in the area where I'm going to put my decals, and now I don't have to worry about silvering anymore. Also, the gloss varnish makes it a little easier to place the decal itself. Then you can move the transfer around afterwards to get it positioned just right. If you do this though, just remember, nothing sticks very well to gloss varnish, so always follow up with a decal medium or another varnish to make sure the transfer stays in place. Second, gloss varnish is a great way to make painted surfaces look like glass. If you have windows or headlights, lenses, or something similar to paint, I suggest that after the model is finished and treated with some protective coats of matte varnish, that you go back and brush paint gloss varnish on wherever you would find the glass itself. Usually these surfaces are quite small, but if you look at a model where you expect to see a glossy finish and it just isn't there, your brain will tell you something is just off. It's likely worthwhile to take the 30 seconds and put a couple layers of gloss varnish on it. The last application for gloss varnish is applying wet effects. Water is, well, shiny, and a layer of gloss varnish brush painted over your paint makes that surface look wet. It's simple to do, and the more layers you add, the glossier it gets. I've painted whole rivers this way, and the effect looks great. It really serves to add some visual interest to your terrain. So there you have it, my methods for using varnishes on my models and terrain. Now there's probably about 1 million different ways to use varnish, so if you have any ideas or techniques you like to use, please put them in the discussion below. That's it for this episode. Remember, we have regular coverage on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Please stay tuned for more from Miniature Landscape Hobbies. Also, if you haven't yet subscribed, please remember to do so and press the bell button so you get all the immediate notifications and you don't miss out. Thanks for watching, and remember, as always, keep building life in miniature.